Great.
Greetings to everybody to this, is it the 9th? I'm not sure even, meeting of Soteria, when we shall be hearing an introduction to the poetry of Thom Gunn by Stedman. And this is very much, I think, in the sense in which I'd conceived originally of Soteria, to reintroduce or rediscover writers whose names one knows, but about whom one is not, when put to it, able to say very much. So it's a rediscovery, a refreshing, and an enjoyment, I hope, of some of the gems and treasures, particularly those gems and treasures we have somewhat forgotten, of our literature. So over to you, Sted, to tell us about the poetry of Thom Gunn.
Greetings. Thom Gunn first crossed my consciousness in the distant days when Radio 3 periodically used to break the broadcasting of music with a 5-minute pause for poetry. I seem to remember that there may have been a designated poet of the month. As a person whose ability to record poems is poor, I can scarcely recall a single stanza to recite, unlike Michael here, who seems able to reel up all sorts of fish from the waters of his past reading. I do recall several poems of Thom Gunn's, that he himself read out, which is quite rare for me. One which I heard only once, and I had not read since I started to put together this little talk, concerned some men in his neighbourhood who were always to be seen outside their house, tattooed with motor grease, at work on a car, most often underneath it. Similar characters surfaced from my youth as I listened. The poet had to pass them on his way home, and he became well acquainted with them. The men were too rough and ready for some of the other residents of the area, but not for him. The last line, as I recall it, was something to the effect that I liked those men. I was impressed by the clarity of the line and the decency of the sentiment it expressed. Maybe it was as much his voice that made a good impression on me. Some contemporary poets have, on the contrary, what seems to me a certain importunate whine in their delivery, which disinclines me. Although he appeared quite at ease in the modern world, his vision appeared relatively unclouded by any ideological agenda, which struck me as a good thing. Soteria has given me the chance to find that poem all these decades, having passed since I first heard it on the radio. All do not all things well implies that some therefore do well for its own sake, one thing they undertake, because it has enthralled them. I used to like the two auto freaks, as I called them, who laboured in their driveway, its concrete black with oil, in the next block that year. One, hurt in jungle war, had a false leg. The other raised a huge beard above a huge Hell's Angel belly. They seemed to live on beer and corn chips from the deli. Always with friends, they sprawled beneath a ruined car in that inert but live way of scrutinizing innards. And one week they extracted an engine to examine, transplant, shining like tar, fished out into the sun. "It's all that I enjoy," said the stiff-legged boy. That was when the officious realtor had threatened them for brashly operating a business on the street. An outsider, that woman, who wanted them evicted. Wanted the neighbourhood neat, to sell it. That was when the boy from Vietnam told me that he'd firebomb her car. Of course he didn't. She won. I'm sorry that they went, quick with a friendly greeting. They were gentle, jokey men, certainly not ambitious, perhaps not intelligent, except about a car. Their work, one thing they knew they could for certain do, with a disinterest and passionate expertise to which they gave their best, desires and energies. Such oily-handed zest bypassed the self like love, I thought they were good for any neighbourhood. It slightly perplexed me that this piece is not included in the recently published new edition of Gunn's selected poems, curated by the distinguished writer on poetry Clive Wilmot, who was also a friend of his, which made me wonder whether I might not understand what the essence of his work is, because to my mind that is an outstanding example of it. Clive Wilmer kindly got back to me and said that he also thinks it's a good poem, but he doesn't like it quite as much as I do. To my mind, it's also a valuable example in a sense of illustrating what distinguishes Gunn's writing. One influence was Elizabethan song. Its title, All Do Not All Things Well, is taken from a line in Thomas Campion's Now Winter Nights Enlarge. Campion was both a musician and a composer of songs. What Gunn admired was the anonymity and the musicality. I should like to be able to say now, let's listen to a recording of that being sung, but I've not been able to find one. But by musicality, I mean the literary cadence, which we can appreciate directly by reading it. And before we do so, I should like to say that at that time, the word tread was pronounced more like reed is today. That is to say, treed. Now, who would like to read it? Michael from London. Perhaps you'd like to read in case you want to leave for another reason. Is that okay? Yeah. Let's screen share. Now, yeah. Can you see that, Michael?
I can see it, yes.
Right.
Now winter nights enlarge the number of their hours, and clouds their storms discharge upon the airy towers. That now the chimneys blaze, and cups o'erflow with wine. Let well-turned words amaze with harmony divine. Now yellow waxen lights shall wait on honey love, while youthful rebels mass in courtly sights, sleep's laden spells remove. The time doth well dispense with lovers' long discourse. Much speech hath some defense, though beauty no remorse. And do not all things well, some measures comely tread, some knotted riddles tell, some poems smoothly read. The summer hath his joys, the winter his delights, though love and all his pleasures are but toys, they shorten tedious nights.
Thanks very much. In an essay about the poet William Carlos Williams, Gunn praises him for being more interested in the world than himself, and I think that attitude certainly is expressed in his in the first poem about the two men who are more interested in cars than themselves, perhaps. And he fails to praise the students in his creative writing class for the opposite, who write, he says, of breakdowns, mental institution, and suicide attempt, of which the experience does not seem first-hand. It's all very poetic poetry. In distinction, the value he placed upon anonymity came from the belief that simply to register and delineate external reality was enough, an approach that was confirmed by the period of study at Stanford University after his graduation from Cambridge in 1953 under Ivor Winters. Who is he, you might well ask? In a letter to a college friend, Gunn wrote, I'm working under Ivor Winters, who has something of the same position in America as Leavis does in England. The same stubbornness, rudeness. His critical position is just about that of Dr. Johnson. If Dr. J were alive today, rather too much common sense and an acute dislike of anything romantic, which term includes Lawrence, Yeats, and Eliot. Ivor Winters was a similarly charismatic, peremptorily opinionated voice within the literary world as F.R. Leavis was at Cambridge. Though unlike Leavis, he was a poet himself, and his collected poems was awarded the prestigious Bollingen Prize in 1960, 12 years after it had been controversially awarded to Ezra Pound. A principal theme of his work was the opposition between reason and the senses, and their capacity to overcome the mind, which may be a theme more relevant to Thom Gunn than to some others. And to characterize him by highlighting this kind of contrast has been commonplace, though no less true for that, since the restraint and discipline of his poems were at variance with the strong current of sensuality and risk-seeking that ran through his life, which was to kill him. But at the age of 70 years and 10 plus 5, when he felt that he had nothing more to say. This theme is to some extent expressed in the following poem by Ivor Winters, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, harking back to an old English poem. For those unfamiliar with the story, one Yuletide, the Green Knight mysteriously arrives at court and asks Gawain to strike him with an axe to win the axe. But a year and a day later, Gawain must, however, allow himself to be struck in return. The allotted time almost having passed, Gawain goes in search of the Green Knight, finds where he lives, but still has a few days before he must meet him, so he stays at a nearby castle, and there the lady attempts 3 times to seduce him while her lord is out hunting. This is a test, and the lord is in fact the Green Knight in disguise, and when he meets Gawain the next day and strikes him, it is Gawain's fidelity which protects him. Now, I have a recording of Ivor Winters speaking this poem. It's fairly short. Let's go to that.
Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Reptilian green the wrinkled throat, green as a bough of yew the beard. He bent his head, and so I smote. Then for a thought my vision cleared. The head dropped clean, he rose and walked. He fixed his fingers in the hair. The head was unabashed and talked. I understood what I must dare. His flesh cut down arose and grew. He bade me wait the seasons round, and then, when he had strength anew, to meet him on his native ground. The year declined, and in his keep I passed in joy a thriving Yule, and whether waking or in sleep, I lived in riot like a fool. He beat the woods to bring me meat. His lady, like a forest vine, grew in my arms. The growth was sweet, and yet what thoughtless force was mine. By practice and conviction formed, with ancient stubbornness ingrained, although her body clung and swarmed, my own identity remained. Her beauty, lithe, unholy, pure, took shapes that I had never known, and had I once been insecure, had grafted laurel in my bone. And then, since I had kept the trust, had loved the lady yet was true, the knight withheld his giant thrust, and let me go with what I knew. I left the green bark and the shade, where growth was rapid, thick, and still. I found a road that men had made, and rested on a drying hill.
Now, let's follow that with another one of his poem, since Ethel Winters is one of the most significant mentors that Gunn had, and certainly a poet that has fallen out of prominence. This is about a father seeing his daughter off at an airport, which seemingly marks an ending of a stage in their relationship. Mehran, would you be able to read this?
Well, I can make a try, but it would be nice to have time for preparation. But
I know no one is. No, we're all thrown into this.
Okay, since I have an own daughter, this is so touchy, and I mentioned something about San Francisco in late, show. So this is nice. Okay, let's go. This is the third. This is the terminal. The light gives perfect vision, cold and hard. The metal glitters deep and bright. Great planes are waiting in the yard. They're already in the night, and you are here beside me, small, contained and fragile, and intent on things that I but half recall. Yet going whither you are bent, I am the past, and that is all. But you and I, in part, are one. The frightened brain, the nervous will, the knowledge of what must be done, the passion of acquire the skill to face that which you dare not shun. The rain of matter upon sense destroys me momently. The score, there comes what will come. The expense is what I want, thought, and something more. Once being an intelligence, this is the terminal, the break. Beyond this point, on lines of air, you take the way that you must take. And I remained in light and stare, in light and nothing else, awake.
Thanks very much. That was good. Thank you. That's good. In addition to anonymity and musicality, which I've spoken of in describing Gunn's poetic voice, one might add a certain sense of seriousness, which may in part have been fostered by the opinions of Leavis and Winters. That is to say, a literary sense of morality, that a literary work should have a truth and an authenticity to it. Gunn chose and wrote the introduction to a selection of poems by Ben Jonson, the contemporary of Shakespeare, in which he said, "The process of understanding amounts to something more than comprehending the text. Understanding means taking the poems to heart, means ultimately acting on them." That suggests to me that he thought a poet should in some way construct a world that one could happily inhabit, rather than merely one that was alternatively entertaining. One fact about Thom Gunn that aroused my interest is his place of birth. If you've ever been to Gravesend, I think you might understand that. But perhaps I've just been to the wrong parts of Gravesend, or like many towns, the quality of its denizens has noticeably declined within the decades separating his arrival there from mine. One can often see this by looking at the buildings where stately and formerly detached residences now stand surrounded by cheaply erected units of housing. His parents were both journalists of Scottish origin and sufficiently successful in their field for the Gunns to move to Hampstead when he was 10, which at that time was just as expensive and culturally select an area of London as it is today. His father, most notably, had been editor of the national tabloid newspaper Daily Sketch. Tom attended University College School and Bedales when he was evacuated from London during the war. He was born in 1929 on the 29th of August, and the name he was born with was actually William, but he grew up as Tom and came to spell it with a TH in order to refer back to his mother's maiden name, Thompson, since he was very close to her and not at all to his father. When Tom was 11, the parents divorced and he and his brother remained with the mother. Each of the parents soon remarried, and the brothers stayed with their mother and her new husband. But 4 years later, the marriage broke up, and sadly, the mother committed suicide. She killed herself by inhaling gas from the gas poker in the kitchen. Writing in his diary at the time, Tom attributed the cause to her second husband, who didn't seem to get on with the two boys, and who had left her a few days before. Some of Gunn's best poems are about death. This loss, however, was so close that he was only able to reach the necessary distance from it in order to write about it almost half a century afterwards, and in the third person. In the poem, the word burden, which appears in the 16th line, can also mean a droning sound. So it's got that other sense, a sound like that of the bagpipes. And in the last lines, there is a reference to the classical tale of Pan chasing Syrinx, who asks for help from the water nymphs, and they change her into a reed to escape his pursuit, which he then uses to play a lament for her. Paul, would you like to read this poem? Oh, let's go.
Where is Gravesend's? Where is
It's
Gravesend?
it's in Kent. It's outside of London. Yeah, it's not a place that one would really want to go to, except for a good reason.
Right.
No. Here we are. The gas poker.
The gas poker. 48 years ago, can it be 48 since then? They forced the door which she had barricaded with a full bureau's weight, lest anyone find, as they did, what she had blocked it for. She had blocked the doorway so to keep the children out. In her red dressing gown, she wrote notes, all night busy pushing the things about, thinking till she was dizzy. Before she had lain down, the children went to and fro on the harsh winter lawn, repeating their lament, a burden to each other in the December dawn, elder and younger brother, till they knew what it meant, knew all there was to know. Coming back off the grass to the room of her release, they who had been her treasures knew to turn off the gas, take the appropriate measures, telephone the police. One image from the flow sticks in the stubborn mind, a sort of backwards flute.
Thank you very much.
Very sad, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's difficult to understand the effect that would have on someone. You know, he's very close to his mother, and committing suicide on some level, surely it would have been felt as some kind of a rejection. I don't know. I mean, it's please, anyone who's got comments as we go through, just say them at the time. I think after 2 years of national service in the army, he went up to Cambridge to read English. Some months before that, he had changed his name by deed poll to Thompson William Gunn. From all that I've read about him, both in his autobiographical accounts of his time at Cambridge and elsewhere, his principal intellectual interest seems to have been poetry and the whole process that gives birth to it. That's to say, he doesn't seem to have had an interest in using poetry to advance a position about anything other than matters of poetry. Neither Marxism nor Roman Catholicism seems to have threatened to claim his allegiance. His significant decisions pertained rather to which meters of versification to use. I've not encountered the citation of any extra poetical belief of his that stood out and seemed important to grasp in order to grasp the meaning of his poetry. After his studies with Ethel Winters at Stanford, he procured a position at UCL Berkeley, where he taught off and on for almost 40 years. He published his first collection of poems, Fighting Terms, the year after he graduated from Cambridge, and followed this by at least 9 other major collections of poetry and 2 of prose. And in addition to the Ben Jonson, mentioned earlier, who curated a selection of poems by Ezra Pound. It would be tedious to list the numerous awards he received for his poetry, and I'm not sure what it would signify about the absolute quality of his work to do so, except perhaps in the words of one anonymous commentator, that he was a poet's poet, and that his work was well regarded by people of influence who read a lot of poetry and who sat on award committees. But he didn't seem to have had the outreach of a Larkin or a Judgement. In 1962, he issued My Sad Captains, from which this poem, Innocent, comes. There is justification in preparing the mind of a listener with some words about a poem, yet equally I think it's justified to allow it to fall naturally upon the apprehension and to speak of it afterwards. In deference to the title, let us listen to the poet himself with a relatively innocent ear.
He ran the course, and as he ran, he grew, and smelt his fragrance in the field. Already, running, he knew the most he ever knew, the egotism of a healthy body. Ran into manhood, ignorant of the past, culture of guilt and guilt's vague heritage, self-pity and the soul. What he possessed was rich, potential, like the bud's tipped rage. The core developed, it was plain to see, courage, endurance, loyalty, and skill to a morale firm as morality, hardening him to an instrument until the finitude of virtues that were there budded within the swarthy uniform, a compact innocence, childlike and clear, no doubt could penetrate, no act could harm. When he stood near the Russian partisan being burned alive, he therefore could behold the ribs wear gently through the darkening skin and sicken only at the northern cold, could watch the fat burn with a violet flame and feel disgusted only at the smell, and judge that all pain finishes the same, as melting quietly by his boots it fell.
The story of the poem is taken from the autobiography of an SS man, translated by Constantine Fitzgibbon, but whose author I've not been able to trace. Gunn composed it in Berlin, and it took him a long time to finish because of the moral ambiguities. An early draft apparently came across to one of his friends as being too pro-SS, so he wrote him a long letter from which these comments come. I think there is ultimately rather little difference in war between the attitude a soldier has towards killing, which is never clean, a neat hole through the forehead, and that he has towards atrocity. By attributing innocence to this man, I'm not exonerating him or the SS, but I am attacking innocence. In the first three stanzas, I'm deliberately keeping myself from judging against the boy, except in the line about hardening to an instrument, which is more against the SS than him. Because I'm trusting in the last two stanzas to do the work for me. Surely those two stanzas show that the courage, endurance, loyalty and skill are virtues meaning nothing without the virtue of wisdom. Vide Plato passim, see Plato in many places. And that innocence is not, as popularly supposed, a virtue, but a mere vacancy into which anything can be put, including horrors. I don't know whether anyone would disagree, but it seems to me permissible to enjoy a work of art on a different basis from that on which it was made. For it would seem to me that innocence, on the contrary, is a virtue if one is never guilty of acting on a base motive or out of ill will or from inappropriate self-interest. To be innocent thereof, that definitely seems to me a moral good. To achieve what he calls vacancy, or an emptying of the soul, emptying of the self, from a religious perspective, is to open oneself up to being steered by a higher force than oneself, or indeed to a lower force, but if so, then in that case one would no longer be innocent by at least one of its definitions, which is that of being sinless and free of moral wrong. For me, although it's not quite the theme in the mind of the poem captures something of the male appeal of perfecting oneself in uniformity with others in a uniform, of pouring one's irregular individuality into a greater cause for which one is prepared to die, and to find therein salvation. There's a beauty to this, however unbeautiful the cause may prove to be. And I think it's a persistent feature of mainly male psychology that should be acknowledged rather than ignored. As the animals we are, we have the instincts we have, not those we should or should not have. Finally, I should like to ask you to remember this discussion, because innocence will be the last word in the last poem to be read today, where vacancy is the very opposite of what he uses it to mean. We now turn to what is the most well-known poem of his, I think. On the Move appeared in his second book, The Sense of Movement, and it was written after he'd been reading Sartre's L'existentialism et Humanism, and had been watching Laszlo Benedek's film The Wild One, starring Marlon Brando as a leather-clad biker. Gunn said that this is the only time I've written adequately on one of the really important subjects. The poem is about movement as an experiment, and about the search for value as a value in itself. The poet contrasts the purposeless bikers with the still purposeful birds. The former, who in the wake of the 2 world wars and the loss of faith in both the worldly and otherworldly dispensations of Western society, had become dislocated from it, and the latter, who instinctively know their reason for existence because they're still integrated into the natural order. To quote, this is the bikers, the towns they travel through are homes for neither bird nor holiness, for birds and saints complete their purposes. The human equivalent of the bird is the man who has the divine, the gods at the heart of his life. There is a magnificence, I think, in the assertion of an untrammeled will, and yet also something pathetic about a person of power and potential who has no purpose. It's characteristic of the formal concerns of the poet that he notes that when he wrote the poem, he still pronounced toward with 2 syllables, as I think we all would do, but as was not the case in Elizabethan English nor in American English, where it's just 1 syllable. In time, he came to regard himself as an Anglo-American poet, with some reason given the fact that he would spend almost 3/4 of his life there in America, and perhaps as a consequence of that, he felt that the impersonal pronoun one is too stilted in this poem. For example, in one lacks direct instinct because one wakes afloat on movement that divides and breaks. Anyway, maybe we can all think about whether we find it stilted or not. Michael Alf-Cohen, would you be willing to read this? I think you once said that you'd read it at school.
Oh, I don't think so, but
okay, well, give it. Let's get this up. Yeah.
On the Move. The blue jay scuffling in the bushes follows some hidden purpose, and the gust of birds that spurts across the field, the wheeling swallows, has nested in the trees and undergrowth, seeking their instinct or their poise, or both. One moves with an uncertain violence under the dust thrown by a baffled sense, or the dull thunder of approximate words. On motorcycles, up the road they come, small, black as flies hanging in heat, the boys, until the distance throws them forward. Their hum bulges to thunder held by calf and thigh. In goggles donned in personality, in gleaming jackets trophied, in gleaming jackets trophied with the dust, they strap in doubt, by hiding it robust, and almost hear a meaning in their noise. Exact conclusion of their hardiness has no shape yet, but from known whereabouts they ride, direction where the tires press. They scare a flight of birds across the field. Much that is natural to the will must yield. Men manufacture both machine and soul and use what they imperfectly control to dare a future from the taken routes. It is a part solution after all. One is not necessarily discord on earth or damned because half animal, one lacks direct instinct, because one wakes afloat on movement that divides and breaks. One joins the movement in a valueless world, choosing it till both hurler and the hurled, one moves as well, always toward. A minute holds them who have come to go, the self-defined, astride the created will, they burst away. The towns they travel through are home for neither bird nor holiness, for birds and saints complete their purposes. At worst, one is in motion, and at best, reaching no absolute in which to rest. One is always nearer by not keeping still.
Thank you very much, Michael. Did Thom Gunn ever find his purpose at the level of his spirit, or on a philosophical level? If I may be forgiven for expressing an opinion on someone else's life, I think he identified his purpose, like the men he praised for their dedication to cars, with the writing of good poetry, an end which he pursued with a disciplined and admirable focus, and seemingly without the support of any self-identification with a religious or ideological community, in the way that a person might if he or she thought of himself as a Freudian or a perennialist. Whether the seeking of sensual stimulation through drugs and sexual encounter at the close of his life, when he felt his work's life was over, means he had not found his spiritual purpose, I do not know. Certainly, he had conscientiously discharged the duties of a professional poet with the same level of innocence as the soldier in the poem had honed his art. I watched a video on YouTube of a middle-aged female English teacher in India giving an account of this poem, and it was very instructive to hear how the poem would appear to someone comfortably embedded in a society far more traditional than ours, where the notion of a valueless world was something she needed to take time to explain to her students. When I first read the next poem and the last line of the first stanza, you know, I know you know, I know you know, I wanted to construct a graph or theorem to chart how the meaning changed with each enclosure of the base clause within another, and that beyond a certain number of enclosures the whole sentence would become meaningless. But that will have to wait until I've got more time on my hands. The stimulus to this poem came from a girl who was attracted to him, whom he'd met while at a fruit picking camp, presumably in Kent, where he had relatives. He wrote, "She said at the very beginning that she was a Roman Catholic, and she would not have intercourse with me. However, it was obvious I could persuade her to in a few days." I wonder whether she's still alive and whether she knows she's the cause of this. Mick, are you there? Do you fancy reading this? I'll assume not. Paul, would you, Father Frank? I'm not going to ask you to read that in case it's got. Yeah. There's some good poems
Yes,
later.
yes,
Oh, okay, right, Mick. Let's go for that then. Let's go for that. Yeah. Right, off you go, Mick. It's not easy. Are you on mute? I can't hear anything.
Sorry, who are you speaking to?
Oh, you, Mick. Sorry. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the connection went down. Yeah, I'll read this, mate. Yeah.
Right, thanks.
Even in bed I pose, desire may grow more circumstantial and less circumspect each night. But an acute girl will suspect that myself is not like my body, bare. I wonder if you know, or knowing, care. I know, you know, I know, you know. I am not what I seem, believe me. So for the magnanimous pagan, I pretend substitute a forked crystal as your friend. When darkness lies without a roll or stir, flaccid, we want a competent poseur. I know, you know, I know, you know, I know. Cackle, you hen, and answer when I crow. No need to grope. I'm still playing the same comical act inside the tragic game. Yet things perhaps are simpler. Could it be a mere tearjerker void of honesty? You know, I know, you know, I know, you know. Believe me, within a minute I will starve your greedy mouth, but will not yet to grips. There's a space between the breast and lips, also a space between the thighs and head, so great we might as well not be in bed. I know, you know, I know, you know, I know. I hardly hope for happy thoughts, although in a most happy sleeping time I dreamt we did not hold each other in contempt. Then lifting from my lids night's penny weights, I saw that lack of love contaminates. You know, I know, you know, I know, you know. Abandon me to stammering and go. If you have tears prepared to cry elsewhere, I know of no emotion we can share. Your intellectual protests are a bore, and even now I pose. So now go, for I know you know.
Thanks very much, Mick. Michael London, are you there? If not, I will. I think I'll ask. Yeah, Michael.
I just wanted to comment.
Oh yeah, go on.
Comment in the middle. I mean, that talk about anti-romantic. That's obviously in there for the first prize, I would say.
Perhaps we can talk. Yeah,
perhaps we can talk about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, thanks. The next poem is included principally because Michael in London knew the dedicatee Jera Franzway, as well as the poet. I believe this poem was issued on its own as a one-poem book, a pamphlet, in quite a decorous form. My understanding from reading it is that Gunn visited a Renaissance fair where people were dressed up in costumes of that period, and possibly there were stalls selling articles and music, so forth, of that time. And at some point he took some LSD, and then the whole scene transformed into something mythic. I'm afraid I'm not able to cast more light on some of the sometimes opaquely pregnant diction. So anyone's thought as to what is happening is as good as mine, or perhaps as good as his under the effects. Michael, I will assume you perhaps aren't able to read it.
I can read it actually.
Oh, lovely! Great. Let's go to the screen. Yeah. Off you go, sir.
Fair in the woods. The woodsmen blow their horns and close the day, grouped by some logs. The buckskins they are in merge with grounds russet and with tree trunks gray. And though the color of the body's skin shift borrowings out of nearby birch and clay. All day a mounted angel came and went, steadily pacing through the trees and crowd, his brown horse glossy and obedient. Points glowed among his hair. Dark-haired, dark-browed, he supervised a god's experiment. Some clustered in the upper boughs from where they watched the groups beneath them make their way, children of light, all different through the fair, pulsating among the pulsing trunks, pulsing through the pulsing trunks, and they, the danglers, ripened in the brilliant air. Upon a platform dappled by the sun, the whole speed family in a half round clapped about the dancer where she arched and spun. They raced toward stillness till they overlapped, 10 energies working inward through the one. Landscape of acid, where on fern and mound the lights fragmented by the roofing bough, throbbed outward, joining over broken ground to one long dazzling burst, as even now horn closes over horn into one sound. Knuckle takes back its color, nail its line. Slowly the tawny jerkins separate from bark and earth, but they will recombine in the autumnal dusk, for it is late. The horns call, there is little left to shine.
Thank you very, very much. Yeah, I must say, we were sort of chatting, Michael and I, beforehand, and he mentioned that in various events he was a kind of angel of mercy, and this phrase, all day a mounted angel came and went, and I'd like to think, and shall think, that was referring to the gentleman who's just read the poem. Thanks very much for that.
Cheers.
Towards the end of his life, Gunn said he thought the best book he had produced was unquestionably Morley, from which we shall shortly hear the title poem as introduced and read by the poet. Anyone recognise Morley? We had a Greek speaker, I think, speaking of it. It's from the Odyssey. It's the herb that Odysseus needs to take to stop becoming transformed into a pig. But that will become clear. Gunn was suspicious of drug-inspired poetry, and this suspicion may well have been why in Morley his form returned to traditional metre after a period of experimentation with free verse and Sibyllics, because I think during the period he was working on this book, he took quite a bit of LSD, and maybe he felt that he needed the discipline of the verse forms. He wrote, "The acid trip is unstructured. It opens you up to countless possibilities. You hanker after the infinite. The only way I could give myself any control over the presentation of these experiences, and so could be true to them, was by trying to render the infinite to the finite, the unstructured through the structured. Otherwise, there was the danger of the experiences becoming so distended that it would unravel like fog before the unpremeditated movement of free verse." Morley is about change and transformation. The two great works which stand behind it are, as one might guess, Ovid's Metamorphoses and Pound's Cantos, and of course the Odyssey, which is implicit in the subject. It's also about sunlight as the source of all our energy, which is converted into us and our lives. He asked Faber and Faber, his publishers, if the cover of the book might be yellow because of this, and they made it so.
Thom Gunn, recorded Thom Gunn, recorded in May 1983.
The title of this first poem is moly, a word that occurs in Homer. Moly was the herb that could withstand the spells of the witch goddess Circe, who had turned Odysseus's men into pigs. The poem is spoken by one of those men at the moment of his transformation. He doesn't know at first what animal he has been turned into. At the end of the poem, he starts searching for the moly in the hopes that if he eats it, it will restore him to human shape. Moly. Nightmare of beasthood, snorting, how to wake. I woke. What beasthood skin she made me take. Leathery toad that rots for days on end, or cringing, dribbling dog, man's servile friend, or cat that prettily pounces on its meat, tortures it hours, then does not care to eat. Parrot, moth, shark, wolf, crocodile, ass, flea. What germs, what jostling mobs there were in me. These seem like bristles, and the hide is tough. No claw or web here. Each foot ends in hoof. Into what bulk has method disappeared? Like ham streaked, I'm gross, grey, gross, flap-eared. The pale lashed eyes, my only human feature. My teeth tear. I am the snouted creature that bites through anything, root, wire, or can. If I was not afraid, I'd eat a man. Oh, a man's flesh already is in mine. Hand and foot poised for risk, buried in swine. I root and root. You think that it is greed. It is, but I seek out a plant I need. Direct me, gods, whose changes are all holy, to where it flickers deep in grass, the moly. Cool flesh of magic in each leaf and shoot, from milky flower to the black forked root. From this fat dungeon I could rise to skin and human title, putting pig within. I push my big grey wet snout through the green, dreaming the flower I have never seen.
You know the real thing? It's an herb.
I don't know whether anyone else had the same thought, but the final line, dreaming of the flower I've never seen, puts me inescapably in mind of the elusive blue flower of the German Romantic movement, that soul-sought object of deepest longing, that blessed union with the absolute, with a divine infinity, which I think is a good subject for another Soteria. If death was a recurrent subject matter in his work, so was friendship, which seems to me a good thing, as friendship is also one of the most significant themes in Hávamál. Naturally, these two themes intersected in the death of friends. Maybe it's easy to write poems on death because it's intrinsically important, but these two examples we shall hear seem to me very fine and very accessible, and to have the same virtues as the poem with which I began today's talk. In the first, Duncan, the title refers to Robert Duncan, the poet whose work is famous for its lack of formal constraint, and H.D. refers to the poetess Hilda Doolittle, a contemporary of Ezra Pound. I'm just going to read something that he wrote about the poem. I didn't plan things in this way, but it seemed to be one of the things that I specialise in, filtering some kind of subject matter to a form associated with its opposite. It's as though I'm taking street noises and turning them into a string quartet. I figure that in that way one finds out more about the potentiality of the string quartet also. One finds out more about the rough and unformed, and also about the elegant as well. I was aware of doing this in the Duncan poem, and that in a sense it's part of my subject matter in the Duncan poem. I'm writing about open poetry. In fact, The word ends with an image I get from the Venerable Bede, the sparrow flying to the top of the feasting hall, in one open end and out the other. And of course, open-endedness is also one of the characteristics of Duncan's own poetry. I'm using that as a kind of pun. I think those who come to Bloats will remember the that particular extract from Bede about the soul going through the hall. Father Frank, would you be able to read this?
Okay.
Great. Yeah.
Duncan. When in his 20s, a poetry full of strength burst into voice as an unstopping flood. He let the divine prompting come at length, rushing bear him any way it would, and went on writing while the fair returned from San Francisco back to Berkeley too, and back again and back again. He learned, you add to, you don't cancel what you do. Between the notebook margins, his pen traveled. His own lines carry him in a new mode to ports in which past purposes unraveled. So that, as on the ferry line he rode, whatever his first plans that night had been, the energy that rose from the confusion became changing pastures lived within, while the pen wrote and looked beyond conclusion. 40 years later, and both kidneys gone, every 8 hours, home dialysis, the habit of his restlessness stayed on, exhausting him with his responsiveness. After circulations of one day in which he taught a 3-hour seminar, then gave a reading clear across the bay, and while returning from it to the car, with plunging, hovering tread tight and unsteady, down wheeler steps, he faltered and he fell. Fell, he said later, as if I stood ready into the strong arms of Thom Gunn. Well, the image comic, as I might have known, and generous, but he turned things around to myth. He fell across the white steps there alone, though it was me, indeed, that he was with. I hadn't caught him, hadn't seen in time, and picked him up where he had softly dropped, a pillar full of feathers. Was it a rhyme he later sought in which he might adopt the role of HD, broken-hipped and old, who, as she moved off from the reading stand, stumbled on the platform, but what was held and steady by another poet's hand? He was now a posthumous poet, I have said, for since his illness he had not composed. In sight of our conclusions, his great dread was closure. His life soon to be enclosed like the sparrow's flight above the feasting friends, brief revealed where its breast caught by light, beneath the long roof, between open ends, themselves the margins of unchanging night.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you. In the second of these two poems, the J Car, the title refers to a San Francisco streetcar route. This was another of the poems that I heard him read on the radio decades ago, and was struck by it. Of the man who inspired the poem, the poet Charlie Hinkle, he wrote, "The approach of death to the young and healthy gives rise in me to the tritest of sentiments, but it is so very sad. I keep having the image in my mind of a body being crushed by a mountain, the crushing gradual, complete, and absolutely irreversible." Edith, would you? Oh, are you asleep? Would you like to read
No,
this?
no,
Oh.
I hear better when I close my eyes. I don't know why.
Okay. Yeah.
The J car. Last year, I used to ride the J church line, climbing between small yards recessed with vine. Their ordered privacy, their plots of flowers, like blameless lies, we might imagine ours. Most trees were cut back, but some brushed the car before it swung round to the street once more, on which I rolled out almost to the end, to 29th Street, calling for my friend. He'd be there at the door, smiling but gaunt, to set out for the German restaurant. There, since his sight was tattered now, I would first read the menu out. He liked the food in which a sourness and dark richness meet, for conflict without taste of a defeat, as in the sauerbraten. What he ate, I hoped, would help him to put on some weight, but though the crusted pancakes might attract, they did so more as concept than in fact. And I'd eat his dessert before we both rose from the neat arrangement of the cloth, where the connection between life and food had briefly seemed so obvious, if so crude. Our conversation circumspectly cheerful, we had sat here like children, good but fearful, who think if they behave, everything might, still against likelihood, come out all right. But it would not, and we could not stay here. Finishing up the optimator beer, I walked him home through the suburban cool by dimming shape of church and Catholic school. Only a few white teenagers about. After the 4 blocks, he would be tired out. I'd leave him to the feverish sleep ahead, myself to ride through darkened yards instead, back to my health. Of course I simplify. Of course it tears me still that he should die as only an apprentice to his trade, the ultimate engagements not yet made. His gifts had been withdrawing one by one, even before their usefulness was done. This optic nerve would never be relit. The other flickered, soon to be with it. Unready, disappointed, unachieved, he knew he would not write the much conceived, much hoped for work now, nor yet help create a love he might in full reciprocate.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I find that a beautiful way of saying goodbye to someone that one year.
San Francisco brought back images and memories from my own. I spent a few days there, and I love the place. I didn't take a famous streetcar, I'm afraid, but I was privileged to visit the famous bookshop. It was called the Riding Light Bookshop, where the Beats, Burroughs, Ginsberg, Ferlinghetti,
Oh,
and actually Ferlinghetti was still manager of the bookshop at the time. I had a brief exchange with him, but anyway, so I have high memories of San Francisco, and this very references struck chords.
Oh, that's good. That's good, because yeah, all of us have different experiences that can be sort of touched by something like that. The next and final poem was, he said, in 1992, his favourite amongst his own. One occasion in its creation was a poetry evening at the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, at the end of which the crowd chanted to the setting sun. It's notable that in the Vedic and classical pantheons, and within the mantras that accompany Surya Namaskar, the sun as a sphere of flame is distinguished from the deity that sustains and holds it or pulls it upon a chariot. Matter is the occasion for the perception of deity, but is something other and can be measured using the units of science, which deity, of course, always succeeds in evading. Gunn thought of himself as neither a religious nor a spiritual person, but he did say that this could be considered a hymn. As someone who does think of himself as such a person, I also think it could be considered a hymn, and as an appropriate way to end today's tribute to this fine poet, I think. The style of his life was very different from mine, but it's been a pleasure and an education to read his poems from places I shall never visit. Father Frank, would you kindly read Sunlight?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sunlight. Some things, but their affinity's light's token, are more than shown. Steel glitters from a jack. Small glinting scoops after a wave has broken, dimple the water in its draining back. Water, glass, metal match light in their raptures, flashing the many answers to the one. What captures light belongs to what it captures, the whole side of a world facing the sun. Return to all the original perfection, giving itself to what created it, and wearing green in sign of its subjection, it is as if the sun were infinite. But angry floods are swallowed by the distance. It varies, moves, its concentrations, fires as slowly die. The image of persistence is an image only of our own desires. Desires and knowledge touch without relating. The system of which the sun and we are part is both imperfect and deteriorating. And yet the sun now lasts us at the heart. Grey seedbed, yellow center of a flower, flower on its own without a root or stem, giving all color and shape of power, still recreating in defining them. Enable us, altering like you, to enter your passionless love, impartial but intense, and kindling acceptance around your center, petals of light lost in your innocence.
Thank you very much, Father Frank. Well, yeah, now I think we can have a few people's thoughts on the work. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone who's read the poems. I'm glad you had a connection with San Francisco, Frank. That is good, and I'm glad you have a daughter, Miran. So that was nice. To people that maybe don't know Thom Gunn's work, any thoughts?
Well, certainly, sorry, very briefly, certainly it was an interesting guy to discover. His name has often lingered in my memory because it's quite interesting. It's concise and gun.
Yeah.
It's like a shot. Well, I mean, I'm just glad that you brought it to my attention. I mean, I thought especially the one that was the SS was very provocative. I'm glad he got away with it, and today he may not.
Yeah, I think it's a fine poem. I think it's very good, and he does touch upon a certain beauty which it's important to acknowledge. Yes.
What's the title of the poem again?
Innocence.
Innocence.
Which is and it's interesting the way it links up with the last word of the last poem, which is
right, okay.
about the sun. So that is curious.
Right, very good.
But yeah, go on. Yeah,
Mary, go question.
On. Yeah, go on.
This poetry about his stay in, or maybe this was just a short stay in San Francisco airport. When was that?
Oh yeah, no.
When was that?
Ivor Winters.
Yeah, sorry. That was by Ivor Winters, who was a very important influence on Thom Gunn. So the one you read, Mahram, was by Ivor Winters. But I think that the style is very similar, and it's quite interesting, particularly with the last poem, the attention to the reflections of light and structures and metal and things like that. I don't know. There was something very similar. The kind of architecture of the
when some in some other poetry it was talks and thoughts about acid trips and so on and LSD. I was thinking about this English, very English, try to being alchemical, esoteric and things like that. And one idea struck my mind was this connection to San Francisco and the connection to the talks with this wonderful man Conrad Elst about this influence of Hinduism and everything being related to that. Sanskrit being the core of everything, and it's a native language, and everything should be related to that. And the reason behind asking about this connection to San Francisco is this big tech, tech giants, the seat, the throne of tech giants ruling this world, and the connection between India and the Indian tech industry, and this connection between India, and then Beatles, and then the hippie movement, and now ending up in Silicon Valley. This is so amazing trip. This is a trip, and suddenly you realize that, okay, everything is decided. What are we doing here? And then thought about Fitzgerald and bringing Omar Khayyam and the struggling about these Indian gods. This is an eternal war, obviously going about the free will and determinism. This is so amazing, the world of gods, and they're really exercising true power to our lives. And this Kali, I mean, I was making some research about what Kali is about, and this was, and it's a pity that he didn't mention that, the worst of ages, Kali Yuga. We are living in the worst of ages, and they're running the show, and they're talking about the war.
Yes.
Getting a bit far from Thom Gunn.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Obviously, it's very good that Comrade Elst continues to inspire us. But I thought, let's try and turn our thoughts to the gentleman.
No, he's great. He's great, and he made he put fire in my imagination. And this role of San Francisco, and this Silicon Valley and big tech and big giants and their gods. This I am become death, the destroyer of the world. Once again, they're winning. They're running the show, and that's so great. But okay, where do we think?
Michael, did you? What was your thoughts? I mean, either we got two. I mean, we got three Michaels. Any thoughts? Michael in Cologne, is it what? Yeah, I mean, you're someone.
Well, my first thought is how exceedingly well you did exactly what universities are so often failing to do, which is to re-inspire people and to rediscover literature and to illuminate it without becoming pedantic. And I thought you did that so well. I don't want to embarrass you too much by overwhelming you with praise, but I'm deeply impressed by the way you did it. Makes me slightly worried that I can't do as well with Jean Raspail at the next Soteria. But okay, enough about that. Although that was absolutely excellent, it certainly introduced a poet who I'd only heard of before, just connection one thing, Thom Gunn, the homosexual, because that is the way that the media always are going to, and I thank God you didn't go on about that.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean,
it's the way the media works
the only
today.
thing. That's
Find
the
out the
only thing we can work
sensationalistic
out.
thing, put it up. You know, it's like Heidegger. All they can say about Heidegger is that he probably spied for the Gestapo. Well, it's not a nice thing to do, but they're too stupid to talk about his philosophy. So that's all that you ever get. All you ever get about Thom Gunn, I think, is actually you brilliantly avoid. You actually looked at his poems. So. Two things I did wanted to sort of ask about or picking up. I was struck that apparently Ivor Winters regarded T.S. Eliot as a romantic.
Yeah,
now that's an interesting thing. I mean, T.S. Eliot considered himself to have turned poetry on its head by rejecting the Georgians, by his very critical view of Peter Brook and the Romantics at the end of the 19th century. And so how strange to find. So what might be your comment about that? Was T.S. Eliot a romantic despite himself? I sometimes think he was, but it certainly is a provocative and remarkable comment.
Ivor Winters declaimed ex cathedra what the canon was or wasn't in a rather peremptory way. So that may be why he's not so well known now, because some of his opinions seem rather arbitrary and not to have stood up. Obviously an interesting man. Maybe he was more interesting as a man than he was as a thinker, possibly like Dr. Johnson that Gunn compares him to, whose power, his personality in a room in the salon of conversation was stronger than any of his contemporaries, but his work, perhaps apart from the dictionary, his literary work perhaps isn't of that.
But you don't agree with him then that T.S. Eliot was a romantic to be criticized?
Well, I have to hear what he was saying. I mean, any great poet combines lots of threads, but I mean, one would have to hear what he said, but clearly not in any significant way. I mean,
Johnson,
I mean, he wasn't.
Sorry, Johnson is one of my heroes.
Who is sorry?
Dr. Johnson.
Yes, absolutely.
Heroes.
Yes, he's a good man.
Absolutely, I completely adore and revere Dr. Johnson, both as an intellectual, but also as a personality. He's the archetypal, gigantic English eccentric, and he was incidentally a very strong man of faith.
Yes, indeed. Yes, his faith is, yes, indeed.
I mean, you mentioned Johnson several times in the passage, but I couldn't really see a great connection with Thom Gunn.
No, I wasn't.
Are you confusing with Ben Jonson? Because there are two Johnsons here.
Oh, am I?
Yeah. Dr. Johnson, J-O-H-N, and Thom Gunn apparently
just mentioned the dictionary.
Yeah.
So he's talking about Samuel Johnson.
Yeah, no, let me clarify. Dr. Johnson appeared because Thom Gunn compared Ivor Winters to Dr. Johnson.
So unlike what Michael said, it is relevant. It is Dr. Johnson is relevant.
And Michael was picking up on this opinion of Ivor Winters that classified T.S. Eliot as a romantic, which I don't know, which is a strange thing. But Ben Jonson was a poet that had similar qualities in his writing to Campion. Had a certain form, a certain musicality, and in personality. I think that was what Gunn said that he liked about some of the early Elizabethan writers.
You might like to know that Ben Jonson is buried in Westminster Abbey. And there is a tradition that he was buried standing up, not sort of vertically, not horizontally. And I don't know whether this is authentic or not, but in order, it was also a way in order to save money, because if you were buried horizontally, it cost more to be buried vertically was cheaper.
Do you mean he was? Yeah, I think
yes, just like that. And also on his tombstone are the words, "Oh rare Ben Jonson, oh rare Ben Jonson." But some people say it should be read as "Oh rare, pray." Sorry, this is just a curiosity. If you go into Westminster Abbey, you can look at the gravestone.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, we should find time to learn more about Ben Jonson and Dr. Johnson. Indeed, he's someone that everyone is familiar with as a
He
man
too
who
is
makes
buried in
remarks.
the Abbey and memorialized in the Abbey. But anyway, enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Johnson of Boswell's biography that is more well known, I think, than Johnson of his own writing. Daniel, were you able to hear any of this? Sorry, I haven't said hello to you, but I'm sorry I didn't ask you to read anything, but I wasn't sure whether you had some technical issues. Did you find it interesting hearing about the work of this man?
I have a bit problems with the theme because I have not many knowledge about the grounding. I'm not very well prepared. I only read the article in Wikipedia about Thom Gunn.
All right.
So I haven't had enough time to prepare myself. And in the past 2 hours, I had too many traffic problems to understand. 3 times my connection cut off.
I'm sorry.
So it's a bit difficult for me, and I have to read some things after this lesson to learn more about what was going on.
Yes, of course. Poems do take a few times to enter their world. Yes.
Perhaps important, if you don't know, Daniel, you can pick it up in London Blot. If you put London Blot, Thom Gunn, you can listen to it.
Yeah.
And without having the Zoom connection and just YouTube.
Yeah, it'll be on YouTube. Michael in London, if you're there, did was this of some use or interest, or did it sort of help you to see another side to the person you
Yeah, it certainly gave me a different perspective on Thom. I didn't know him really as a poet. I knew him just in the San Francisco scene.
Yeah.
And so it's been very interesting in that respect. And I like his poetry.
I think it's I mean, obviously I do think it's very fine, and it might be interesting, as I indicated in the notice sent out, to compare him with the other poets of the movement who are far more famous. Ted Hughes and Philip Larkin and some other people, and just to try to.
What disturbed me was the poem that I read, and of course, as an English major who studied under Hugh Kenner, who was the leading one of the leading experts of Joyce, was that there was one sentence which was a question, and it didn't have a question mark at the end of it, and that always bothers me. And that's when I focus on that. Yes, but I mean, it's irrelevant, but as an English major, it's something that I connect with.
Yes, his prose is very good as well. His introduction to poems by Ezra Pound is really masterly. He makes a few relevant points. Very good. And his voice, I think, is nice to hear, and his way of speaking has always reminded me of yours, Michael, in Cologne. I've always thought that. I don't know whether there was a shared education or something. I don't know. I always thought there was something similar there. But yeah, I think. Well, I mean, we're just about to close. I think possibly, but thanks very much for your participation. Very much appreciate that. And you're one of the best readers of poets without seeing them. It's a very difficult thing to do. You do it very well.
I think I'm a bit of a ham.
But a very, very good,
That's what
very
we
good
need.
quality ham. Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye bye. Nick. Yeah.
I think it's striking how well people do read.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and that poetic potential that people have that is so often, and particularly perhaps in the last 100 years, being ignored. And in fact, people have it in them. I mean, to read, and they may not have had the education or whatever, and they can read. You know, it's just. But that takes us into another subject. I won't go into the details of my feelings about that. But as I say, just fantastic job that you did. It inspires me actually to buy his poetry, although I've more than enough books where I am. But
I think Clive Wilmer does a very good job in introducing the poems, and his notes are good. And I've been in touch with some emails with him, and he seems a very decent chap and quite generous answering questions and dealing with things. So it's nice to buy a book if you've got some sense that the person who's behind it is an agreeable fellow. But
absolutely.
Mick, any thoughts? And Edith, we'll just come to you, Miran, if other people have not got anything to say. Edith, what's your any thoughts?
Oh yes, I was fascinated. I've never heard of him. I totally agree with Michael in Cologne that your presentation was sublime.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, really. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I halfway through I thought of we learned about the metaphysical poets at school, and I wondered, but then I was never curious at that age. I never even looked up what metaphysical means, and I don't remember. But I wondered if was kind of almost, although very modern, harking back, because what does meta mean? Metaphysical. What does it?
I think originally it means kind of after. It was about a list of but it's come to mean an over view of something in the sense of metaphysics. It's a branch of philosophy which deals with what there is in general rather than the specific material, the behavior of matter and so forth. So metaphysics means, I think, in relation to the metaphysical poets that had a philosophic sensibility, they were interested in ideas of existence. You must do a Soteria about the metaphysical poets. I mean, that's a good subject.
Yes, I thought maybe he's one of those, but it seems almost like he's arrived from outer space, because it's unusual, because poets are more romantic and earthy and passionate, aren't they? But it was lovely. It was refreshing.
Oh, good. Thanks very much. Mick, any thoughts?
Oh, I enjoyed it. Yeah, I wasn't too familiar with obviously I heard of it, but I wasn't really familiar with his work. It's just kind of a name that was often dropped in with relation of to other poets who were operating in that time. So it's been very educational. So thanks for that.
Oh, good. That's good. And I think can your arms be twisted to give a short talk maybe about a certain Belgian writer that you're quite familiar with?
Me?
Yes.
I'm trying to think who you're talking about.
You know exactly who I'm talking about. I think your favourite novelist, one of them.
Oh, not Welbeck.
The very same.
He's not Belgian. He's French.
Oh, I thought he was
He's
Belgian.
French. I was surprised by
sorry.
Belgium.
Sorry, I deserve to go where the dunce is held. Why did I think he was Belgium? I don't know.
I don't know. I couldn't think of a single Belgian author, you know. So,
well, you're probably thinking of Hercule Poirot, who's always said people say he's French, and he has to correct them and say he's Belgian. And a lot of people think that Hergé was French, and in fact he was Belgian. So perhaps that was.
Why do I think? Oh well, anyway, I can think about that for the rest of the afternoon. Why I thought he was Belgian. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, he'd be a good person, wouldn't he? Maybe. I mean, I know that you're keen on his work.
Well, yeah. I have written things about him, but there are computers that have died, so I'm going to have to, you know, look for notes. I think.
I expect there's some stuff online though we can kind of read together, maybe.
Oh yeah, definitely. Do you know what? I've not actually read his last novel, Serotonin. It was something I thought I wanted to save it for a good time, and I've still not read it yet, even though it's been out about 3 years. I've read everything else, but yeah, I'll definitely get cobble something together for the next.
Yeah, I mean, if we could get it in some visual format, that could be fun to have. Read it together. Oh, that's good.
And anybody with any ideas, just to remind you, we are having a very short meeting on the 15th to discuss that sort of thing.
Yes, indeed.
I think everybody gets the news, don't they? So they want to.
Yeah. I mean, we're a small group, and the principal beneficiary of any meeting is the person that has taken the time or given themselves the task of spending time to read. I think so. That I would recommend it as the thing to do do a short program on something. You know, I think that's a good thing. Miran, any areas that you'd like to explore that you've always been a bit curious about?
Yeah, I mean when you went off Frank, and I must actually admit that I much enjoyed Edith's way of reading. It was religious.
Yes,
something. But my point is that Michael, I mean, it's a question to both you and Michael. It's about this model of arranging what do you call it, Soteria, or some kind of poetry meeting, and this is a very interesting approach to learning and making people to read and get acquainted to poetry and relevant stuff like this. So what is the background of this upcoming of this idea? Is that yours, or is that something that have been tried before in your previous career? I mean, this is something that I want to try on my own, and this is very
excellent.
Thank you. So please bring that all.
Right. Well, I think we can answer that. It was perhaps my idea first.
It wasn't perhaps. It was your idea, and you.
Okay. Yeah, it was my idea first, but instead certainly stressed and brought into this the idea of participation, which I certainly agree with, but he stressed, and I think is so important these days. I mean, we are such passive receivers of information, of propaganda from all sides. You don't know who to trust, and this is true as well in the world of literature. And as I said, I think the role of universities has somehow been lost. It's been taken over by political factions, and intelligence is no longer a priority. The priority in universities seems to be career and morality, and not intelligence and culture. And that is a tragedy. And in some small way, I hope that initiatives like ours will fill the need that is definitely out there for intelligent discourse and culture, which has been, I think, increasingly lost in the universities.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, if that inspires you to your own initiative, that is excellent.
Yes, indeed. There's no greater compliment.
This catch has never been tried before. This is, I have not seen anything like this before. As you say, participatory and bringing in and moderating and all those things. It's a very, very creative and very helpful way of engaging people And when we are talking about, creating some kind of religion for tomorrow, for the future, I think that that could be a platform for, movers and shakers of tomorrow. The resistance and against, what's going on, this predominant, making people forcing people, new forced religions, new, powers surrounding us, and this is a way of, sustaining freedom. So this is
Thank you.
something. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
But I mean, I wonder, is it something that has only been tried here, or has you seen anything similar somewhere else? Thank you.
Michael,
Not really, no. To be honest, I can't say that I have actually, which is perhaps one of the reasons I decided to stop complaining about it and try to do something.
Yeah, it's always a good thing, isn't it? Absolutely.
I realise I have been complaining about that lack actually, Marianne, for about the last 15 years, and realised that maybe I should get off the fence and do something myself, because there comes a point when if people just complain, you stop listening to them. I mean, you listen to someone complaining maybe for 5 or 10 years if you're patient, but after about 5 or 10 years, you begin to say to yourself, why isn't this guy doing something? Is it just the same song if I go to see this person? And then I say, well, I'm guilty almost myself. I'm doing it myself. So.
Yeah, shall we? I think I hope everyone who can will join us on Wednesday at 7:15. I think is the time, isn't it, Mike?
London time, yeah.
London time.
Might be different time for other people. London time.
Yeah, London time for a discussion of Soteria. And I'm very pleased to see Michael in London, and pleased that you were able to read and add your presence, which is a contact, personal contact with the poet, which is very nice, and yeah, that sort of thing is special. So should we, let's all go and get a cup of tea or some.
Indeed. So just stress the 2 points for the diary. One is the 15th, which Sted's just mentioned, and I shall try to emulate Sted. I'll sort of do my best with Genre Spy on the 9th of 10th, Sunday the 10th of October.
Great.
So that's nice. And please come, if you do come on Wednesday, maybe with thoughts of what you can
absolutely
yourself do.
Yeah, think about some ideas. I think that'd be really good.
Shouldn't be just us.
All right then. All the best to everyone. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you to everyone for coming.
And I'm sorry, Daniel, you've had some tech problems, but life is a fight against tech problems. It's the spirit against matter all the time. All right. Bye bye, everyone. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Goodbye.